Welcome to Mamahood After Trauma, where healing and mamahood intersect. I'm Emily, your host. Join us as we discover practical strategies to nurture ourselves with kindness and understanding. Stay tuned for insights and inspiration to support you on your path of healing and growth. Let's dive in together. This is Mamahood After Trauma. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I am so excited that you have taken some time out of your busy mama schedule to tune in and listen to this conversation. Today, we are joined by Lisa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you for joining us. Well, Lisa, let's get started by having you share a little bit about your story and what you are so passionate about now.
Yeah, sure. I'm here just outside of Boston. I live here with my husband and one of my two grown daughters. The other one lives in a very faraway place. She lives in Japan.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. Um, so my kids are grown and semi-flown, and I am a lot of different things that all kind of somehow jive together under, I guess, the umbrella of mental health advocate. So I'm a content creator. I've written a bunch of parenting books, have been for a very, very long time kind of embedded in the parenting space, talking about how to live a perfectly imperfect life and raise perfectly imperfectly, perfectly imperfect kids and be okay with it. That was kind of my niche for a very long time. And then I kind of had an experience in my own personal life that really just completely changed the trajectory of my life and of my work and the things I'm passionate about. I learned when I was 45, so about 10 years ago, I learned that my father, who passed away when I was 10, actually died by suicide.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. So for anybody who may be listening, I'm guessing we'll be talking about suicide off and on throughout this conversation. So if it's triggering, just be gentle with yourselves. But yeah, it was really the kind of an event that really just upended me and kind of broke me apart. And when I found the pieces again, they were different pieces. I felt really compelled to advocate for better mental health care and
Mm.
awareness and suicide prevention, and got me on the path to become a crisis counselor. I work with the Trevor Project. I don't know if you're familiar with Trevor Project.
No, it's not a huge thing in Canada. So can you tell us a little bit
Ah,
about what the Trevor Project is?
yeah, of course. That's right. It's really relegated to the United States, and then most recently they opened an office in Mexico. So it's really just here in the U.S. We are it's a nonprofit organization that really just caters to LGBTQ youth in crisis, ages 13 to 24, and they provide both online, texting help and support for people who are in crisis, as well as just kind of the old-fashioned pick up the telephone and call a crisis counselor. And that's what my role is as a volunteer with them, volunteering, talking to youth in crisis, people who are maybe feeling challenged by coming out, or maybe they're self-harming, or they're experiencing abuse or neglect, or anything that you can possibly imagine that somebody would be in crisis over. So I
Mm-hmm.
do that. I'm a storyteller with an organization here in the US called the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So I go around to different organizations. I'm here in Boston. So in my area on the East Coast, I go around and I share the story of my dad's suicide to really kind of encourage other people to be vulnerable and open up and share their stories. So, and, I write an opinion column called We Are Who We Are that also talks about, a lot of the stuff that we've kind of been conditioned to not want to talk about, like how we
Mm.
really are and if we're really okay and that it's okay to not be okay. So I do a lot of very different things that all kind of circle back to the same, mental health origin.
Yeah, and it seems that mental health is a really, really hot topic now because people are starting
Mm.
to talk about it more, and there's more emphasis on mental health. I mean, there still is a lot of what's the word? Stigma
Stigma.
or
Yeah.
stigma around it, but um we're talking about it more. And
Mm.
I think that is a really great thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it is a great thing. I mean, when you think about it, here, just here in the US alone, just last year, more than 50,000 Americans died by suicide, and
Mm,
over 700,000 people are dying by suicide around the world every year. So we've kind of moved from one pandemic into what I would even consider to be another pandemic, where it's affecting everyone. It's an issue of life or death, but it's something that we do have control over in some cases if we
mm.
get people the help and the support that they need. So that's kind of really what I'm out here talking about and trying to do, is to really normalize these conversations. I mean, like you said, they're getting to be a lot more normal and mainstream, but we've still, as far as we've come, we still have an awful lot more work to do. So that's kind of how I spend my time these days.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's something that I am incredibly passionate about is making sure that every mama in my
Mm.
community has access to healing tools, regardless of her economic status, because your bank account should not determine whether or not you get to heal. It
Absolutely.
shouldn't. It shouldn't. And
Hmm.
that's just I'm a stick in the mud on that one. Um,
You're not alone. I feel the same way.
and private therapy often as well as it can work if you've got a practitioner that is the right fit for you, is
Mm.
not always accessible.
Mhm.
Coaching, like one-on-one life coaching or whatever it might be, is not always accessible.
Mhm.
So, something that is part of my mission is making sure that there are accessible healing tools for every mama,
Mhm.
no
I
matter
love that.
where what number is on your bank statement.
Hmm.
So how has your work in the mental health space evolved over the years since finding out about your father's death, his true cause of death?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's evolved in so many different ways. I mean, I guess if you think of it, I'm a really visual person. So if you think of it in terms of a visual, and you look at
Mhm.
a bicycle wheel, and you look at my father's suicide as kind of that, the center of that wheel, and then you've got all those spokes that kind of run off that center. That's really, that's kind of really how it's evolved. It was just spoke by spoke. I just kept adding them. I kept finding new and different ways, searching for new and different ways over time to be able to take this trauma and this tragedy and this pain and this horrible thing that happened to me and to him and my family, and somehow transform it into something that would have value for other people, that would create a tool for someone who may
Mhm.
be, looking for a lifeline, to be able to start conversations. And so, it was not an overnight thing. It was definitely not an
Oh,
overnight thing.
no.
Um, I mean, so the narrative that I had been given when I was 10 was that my dad had died of a heart attack, and he was a big smoker at the time. He was very active, but he was also a big smoker. And,
Mhm.
the 10-year-old mind does not have the capacity to question that. It seemed reasonable. My father was never anything but a joyful and motivated and loving man. So there was no issue that would have,
Mhm.
made me think otherwise. So, to find out 35 years later, very much by accident, that he ended up taking his own life, just, I mean, it just shattered me to the ground. And
Mm.
it took me years before I would even begin to want to share it with my daughters. So my daughters are grown now, but at the time they were, teenagers. And it took me a very long time just to kind of somehow try maybe rewire my own brain and process the information and
Mm,
kind of there's no coming to terms with it. That's bullshit. There's no coming to terms with it. You learn to live with it, you learn to navigate through it. It accompanies you, that grief
yeah.
and that shock and all of it. It's like it's with you all the time and kind of like that little sidecar,
Yeah.
on the motorcycle. And for me, it was a matter of taking those first few years to kind of assimilate everything, and then it was like, okay, well, this is the reality. This is the new normal. What can I do with it? And little by little, I started sharing my story, and I think that it was when I saw other people's reactions to the story, and I heard other people then being comfortable, feeling like it was a safe space, sharing back to me,
Yeah.
that it was kind of an aha moment for me where I was like, okay, this is really a powerful story. It's a powerful experience
Hmm.
because I basically have lost my dad twice in my life. I've grieved
Yeah.
his death twice in two very different ways, two very different, points of time in my life. So it's a little bit of a unique story in that way. So why not use it to benefit other people who may who may be able to connect with some aspect of that story. So it started small, and then there was just kind of a ripple effect. And then I started writing about it, which is, that's kind of what I do for a living. I create a lot of content in a lot of different spaces, and I started writing about it. And again, it just kept opening up more doors. Every time I would share, it was another door that would open. And so I started partnering with a lot of mental health organizations and volunteering. And that's when I got involved with the Trevor Project here in the US and
Hmm.
trained to be a counselor. And yeah, just one thing kind of led to another. I'm writing another book now. It's very much about my father's suicide, and the story itself is just a way to talk about sharing our stories. It's a vehicle for telling our stories. So yeah, lots of different things. And one thing in particular that I don't know if it could be beneficial. I hope it could be beneficial to your audience, especially when you mentioned a few minutes ago that you really are committed to helping moms find the resources that they need. One of the things, I don't want to say it haunted me, but it did haunt me a little bit, is that my dad, this all happened in the 1970s, in the late
Mm,
1970s. There were no resources that were mainstream in the way there are now. There were no websites and portals, and the internet didn't exist, and
hmm.
so stigmatized that I knew he probably didn't have the resources that he needed. And we do live in a world where we have a lot of resources, but I wanted to create a resource that would help everyone.
Yeah.
And
We interrupt this amazing conversation for a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster in mamahood, ready to break free from the fear and frustration that's holding you back? Introducing Mama Untriggered private podcast series, a transformative 5-episode journey to help you calm your nervous system and reclaim your strength in mamahood. In each episode, we'll guide you through practical, actionable steps to understand your triggers, build your trigger toolbox, and harness the power of community for support. Say goodbye to those moments of overwhelm and hello to more peaceful, empowered you. You didn't become a mama to spend your day on edge. It's time to take control of your emotional well-being and create a positive, joyful experience for you and your littles. Ready to break free from the emotional roller coaster? Subscribe now to the Mama Untriggered private podcast series and start your journey to a calmer, happier mamahood today.
there are a lot of different communities out there, a lot of different communities and groups of people, and some are more marginalized than others, and there wasn't one place that I had ever seen in like the last 10 years of researching and my own mental health journey. I hadn't seen any place that really was kind of a catch-all, was kind of a hub for
Mm,
all the I mean, no one can possibly accumulate all the resources there are in one
yeah.
place, but there are resources that are certainly kind of pillar resources, like the 988 Lifeline here in the US, or the
Mm-hmm.
Trevor Project, or American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Like, there are some really big organizations. So I started creating my own resource hub on my website, and it
Mm-hmm.
has evolved. It's evolved a lot in the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months, where it's now, instead of it just being a straight list of crisis support hotlines and resources, it's broken down into 16 different categories. So I've got, for the
Mm-hmm.
AAPI population, for the BIPOC population, for veterans, for the elderly, LGBTQ population. I mean, and all the way kind of across the gamut. Canadian resources, I have a tab for Canada, I have a tab for Europe, I have as
Oh,
many,
wow.
yeah, I have as many different groups and communities as I could think of that would, kind of cover the gamut. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own now, which is a beautiful thing to see. And I continue to add
Mm-hmm.
to it. And it has hundreds and hundreds of resources, and they're just a click away. Because when you're in that position, like, especially when you're a mom, like,
Yeah.
motherhood is so unbelievably isolating, and it's so reminiscent of, I think, the isolation that people feel around mental health challenges, where you feel
Mm-hmm.
like there may be an entire world out there of people who are struggling with the same thing you're struggling with mentally, but in your own head, in your own
It's you.
struggle, it's you, right? You're very much alone, and motherhood is very much like that. Parenthood is like that. So I wanted to create something that would put help just a single click away from the people who needed it. So, that's another thing. You talk about, like, how has my journey evolved? It's evolved with creating resources like that, and toolkits that I have, that I'm actually in the process of adding to my website now. A bunch of toolkits for people to print, download, share,
Mm-hmm.
that are, how do you talk to someone about suicide, or what are some self-help, what's a list of self-help tips for, keeping your mental health in check, things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, you know, by having conversations like you and I are having today, that, people who are listening can find these resources and access them and share them.
Yeah. So usually in my episodes, I will ask my guest for tips. So for you, it's going to be a little bit different because you work in the space
Mm-hmm.
with people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide,
Mm-hmm.
but you've also lived on the other side of it. So what are your tips for survivors of suicide? Maybe they've had a family member or a friend
Mm-hmm.
die by suicide. What tips do you have for them that they can use to help heal?
I can speak from my own personal experience, and I
Yeah.
can say some of the best ways that I've been able to find healing have been therapy. That's
Mm-hmm.
a huge one for me. I actually just returned to, personal therapy after 30 years. I mean, I was in my 20s, I think, the last time I ever saw a therapist. And the reason was very different. I was, just kind of struggling with, where did I want to go to college? And,
Mm.
there is a bunch of totally unrelated issues in my life that I went to therapy for, and took a huge break from it and went back to it. And it was a giant act of self-care, and such a huge gift to myself, because it gives you that outlet, that person, that unbiased opinion, who won't judge you, who's just going to
Mm-hmm.
listen to what you have to say and what you're feeling and validate that. And so I would say, kind of up at the top of that list would be therapy, for sure. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is just I think finding your own personal outlets, like for me, for instance, finding daily practices that help you release the things that you're carrying around, whether it be your guilt or your survivor guilt, which is a huge one, or
Mm-hmm.
your the big why, especially where suicide is concerned. The why is such a big issue that haunts people. I'm not going to lie, it haunts me too. I don't know what my father's why was. I'll never know. So we carry around a lot of things that, while generalized grief and loss are such heavy things to carry around, there is a very unique nuance to suicide, because there are
Mm-hmm.
pieces of a suicide that maybe aren't found in a traditional kind of loss. So I journal a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
journal a lot. I mean, I'm a writer, so I'm always writing, but I also have my own personal journaling practice. I kind of put those thoughts in a place where I can reflect on them lately. I can kind of get them out of my head. Um, Movement is a big one for me. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
runner. I try to get out. I'm either at the gym, or I'm running, or I'm walking, or I'm just getting outdoors and I'm kind of moving my body. And you take advantage of those endorphins and the benefits that they can give you when you're kind of in a funky mood. And the other thing is just like leaning into people. Like that's why we have community.
Mm-hmm.
Leaning in and finding support from the people who you love, who you trust, who you know you're safe with, and having those hard conversations, and asking people openly, like, I need someone to hold a little space for me. You don't have to do anything. I just need someone to listen.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, all of those things combined they've all been huge factors in my being able to kind of turn some of that sadness into hopefulness, and maybe even, a little bit of inspiration too.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all great. I journal a lot too, and
Mm.
I haven't lost anybody to suicide, but it is a amazing tool
Mm-hmm.
that has been huge for my healing.
Mm.
So, what words of support or advice would you give to a listener who may be struggling with thoughts of suicide?
I
And
would say
that's a deep question.
it's a deep question. Yeah, yeah. And I could answer it 100 different ways, but I think, it's not the first time I've been asked that question. And I always kind of default to the same answer, because I really think it is the best answer, or at least it was the best
Hmm.
answer for me when I was in that position of, all of it being so brand new.
Hmm.
I really worked very, very hard at trying to meet myself and my feelings exactly where I was in the moment.
Hmm.
When we're within this period of intense grief and loss, and we're consumed by it and overwhelmed by it and not thinking clearly because of it, we just want to rush through it. We don't want to acknowledge it.
Mm.
We want to kind of tamp it down and see if we can kind of sidestep it somehow, and just get to the other side of it. And you can't. There is no getting around it. There is no path around it. The path is only through it. And
Mm.
it's a shitty path. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. It's a hard, I hope I can swear on this podcast. It's a very difficult road to walk, um, because there's a lot of pain attached to it, and
Hmm.
uncertainty and vulnerability.
Hmm.
But I think when we open ourselves up to those things, and we kind of run at them instead of running away from them, number one, things are always a lot scarier in our heads than they are maybe in real life. So when
Hmm.
we're thinking about the pain that we're in, and we're kind of overwhelmed in our own heads and kind of paralyzed by it, it's it's hard to see that there is another side of it. When we get kind of, I guess, we get buried by it. But if we
Hmm.
get up and move forward through it, and kind of try to meet it where it is. If you're sad, be sad. If you feel like screaming, go into a room and scream. If you need to cry, cry. Whatever it is that you're feeling, just feel it. And
Yeah.
for as long as you need to feel it, because that's the thing about whether it's grief or loss or panic or any of these things that we try to avoid.
Hmm.
We may be in them for a period of time. It may even be a longer period of time than we wish we were in them. but there
Mm-hmm.
is another side to them. There's always
Yeah.
an after, and it's hard. You're in the thick of it, and you're overpowered by it. You can't see that there's another side of it. You can't see that there's an end point to it, but there is a point where it doesn't feel the way it feels right at that kind of critical mass point. So yeah, I would say just be gentle and kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace, and
Mm.
don't try and rush it, because it's kind of out of your control anyway.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you fight against the tide and it's not going to get you anywhere. You kind of let the tide take you where it needs to take you, and you'll end up in a place where you can put your feet on the ground again.
Yeah. Yeah. Those big, heavy emotions they can be a lot, and
Yeah.
they can be really scary because you can't see the end, and all you can see is this big scary thing.
Hmm.
And if if you proceed through it, on the other side, there's something better
Hmm.
than the
Usually, yeah.
fear, than the
Yeah.
fear.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's this thing that happens too when we kind of, attack the problem or run toward the thing that we're afraid of, is that we kind of take back agency
Mm,
over our situation. When
yeah.
you're afraid to move forward and you're in that place of being paralyzed, there are so many different feelings attached to that. You're scared, you're vulnerable, you're exposed, you feel powerless. But when you do take those steps to move toward the thing, whatever the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, especially if that thing is a scary or hard or sad thing, at least subconsciously, you've been the one to make the decision to move forward and to try and go through it. So there's a piece of control there that exists that can be really
Yeah.
empowering.
Yeah.
And when you know that that was your decision, it I don't know, it gives, at least in my particular case, it's been very empowering for me
Yeah.
personally to kind of, run toward those things and then discover, okay, I can exist here. I can be okay here. I can make it through this thing. And I
Yeah.
chose to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. That's been my experience as well.
Hmm.
How can our listeners connect with you further if they wish to do so?
I am kind of all over the place. I'm a little bit of a social media nomad. The best place to connect with me is on my website. It's lisasugarman.com. It's where that mental health resources hub that we talked about a few minutes ago, that's where that lives. It's where you can find the YouTube series that I have called the Suicide Survivor Series. I drop a new 90-second video every Monday, just about my own experience with suicide and being a survivor and grief and loss and just mental health in general. It's where you can find any of the content that I've written, any of the books that I've written, and my own personal survivor stories there too. So and all my socials are there too, so you can find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to share with us. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. If you would like more of the Mamahood After Trauma community, make sure to look in the description of this episode for the link to become a Mamahood After Trauma Inner Circle member. Until next time, Mama, keep